Hi, I'm Louise Mowbray, founder of Mowbray by Design and your host. Welcome to Lift, my conscious leadership podcast, Lead into the Future, today. I'm on a mission to bring you powerful insights and very human stories from leaders and entrepreneurs who are each, in their own way, contributing something noteworthy to shaping our world of work. Conscious conversations with people who are being conscious leaders and doing conscious business. My aim is to give you a personal lift to inspire you in your day-to-day business life. Make sure you subscribe now to never miss an episode. Today, I'm talking to Stan Stalnaker, founding director of Hub Culture, the conscious social network with over 50,000 global members. Hub Culture began in 2002 as one of the first online social networks and has always been at the forefront of change and new ideas. I first met Stan in London in 2005 and joined Hub Culture shortly afterwards. Since its inception, Hub Culture has produced over 50 pop-up locations in cities around the world with over 70,000 hosted guests, introduced virtual reality environments, interviewed thousands of cultural and business leaders, and launched integrated financial services around Venn. As part of Hub Culture's ecosystem, Stan advises portfolio companies with activities in blockchain, space, legal frameworks and digital content, and consults with governments and industry regulators on emerging technology, best practices and frameworks to lay the foundations for Hub Culture's eventual emergence as the first virtual state. I wanted to talk to Stan about what Hub Culture is up to today, his recent visit to the Amazon, and how Hub Culture is serving their digital citizens from a conscious leadership perspective. Stan, welcome to Lift. It's amazing to have you here with me today.
Thank you. It's great to be here. Kind of a distance between us, but technology makes it feel like we're right face to face.
Absolutely. And I think just, we're smack bang in the middle of the coronavirus, the novel coronavirus, which I think without a doubt is going to have quite an influence on the rapid movement over to digital if it hasn't happened already for a lot of people. But let's not talk about the coronavirus today. Stan, give me a bit of background. You founded Hub Culture and you're the CEO of Hub Culture. Tell me a little bit more about what Hub Culture is up to today.
Thank you. Well, yes, I am the founder and founding director of Hub Culture. Hub Culture is a community, a digital community that exists both online and in the real world. It's today the longest running online social network, but it's really a social network focused on business and conscious leadership. So we are actively creating space for our members to be able to hopefully move toward self-actualization. And in the context of that, we're building up the frameworks for the first, what we call virtual state, or the first virtual country. And that's been a many-year process for us, working on a lot of different things to be able to put the tools in place to help our members be able to achieve, that goal.
So, goodness, Stan, straight into independent state. And I'm sure that has a lot of people wondering, what on earth does that look like? What is it, how does one operate in an independent state?
Well, so our view would be that in the future, the world will see more, say specialization or granularization. And that means that there's space emerging between the citizen and the state. And a virtual state, what we're essentially building, is designed to provide services for our community in that kind of world. So we don't see it fully as an, independent nation state, but we see it as a new kind of institution, a new kind of entity, really based in a way on tribalism, which is a very old idea.
Right.
The nation state construct is actually only 200, maybe 250 years old. Before that, the world existed really in tribes. And we see digital tribes, virtual tribes, as being something that are persistent throughout history. And if you are really active in providing services and capabilities for a community, our tribe, that does tend to take on the form of a virtual state. So, in simple terms, what does that mean? It means that we're trying to provide the best space for conscious transformation for our people. And it also means that we're trying to provide advantages and opportunities to our kind of quote unquote society. So that began with digital currency. In 2007, we launched one of the first digital currencies, Ven. And then it moved into digital identity. So we're actively providing own your own data forms of digital identity for our members. And those digital identities can be used across the web. Obviously, economic empowerment or wealth creation through opportunities and sort of business or work that comes through the community. And then more recently, governance. So we launched a program called Propel, which is focused on what we call liquid governance, which is real-time voting and exportable governance that can be moved or created from one area within the community and exported to another area. There are other things that we're doing beyond that around tokenization and exchanges and artificial intelligence, but all of them serve the idea of creating a basic framework that is designed to serve our members.
Stan, it's so interesting because I think you and I met in around about 2005. And I can remember joining Hub Culture.
Don't date us.
Gosh, I shouldn't really, should I? And you founded, I think, Hub Culture in around about, if I remember correctly, around about 2007.
Well, so Hub Culture, the community, well, it was like many things. I worked in media at Time Warner. So Hub began in 2002, and then we started doing events and parties and fundraisers and stuff over the ensuing years. And then in 2007, I finally left my day job to focus on it full time. So it has several inception points. The company, and now there's many companies, half a dozen companies that run the aspects of the community. That all began in 2006, 2007. But the community started in 2002.
Yeah, and thanks for filling me in. And I definitely aged both of us there, but I have to say, one of the
we were very young when we met.
We were so young. I know, it was
we
ridiculous.
Were just babies.
Exactly. And Stan, one of the things I remember after joining Hub Culture is using Ven to exchange services with somebody else rather than cash, hard cash. And for me, that's apart from the events and actually getting people together and the networking and the types of people who you were attracting at the time, that for me was really quite groundbreaking, that one would actually exchange, almost an energy exchange at times, although it may have been products or services or whatever it might have been. One thing for another, a barter type system originally. And the power of that, in the community, as far as I could tell at the time, and this is obviously things have evolved and changed and grown so much since then, was absolutely huge. Tell me about that vibrant exchange today.
Well, thank you. The reality is that digital currencies have become a major force. We began Ven in 2007, and then along came Bitcoin in 2009, and then over 10,000 other digital assets have come into being since then. So, Ven has always had a lot of intentionality built into it because of the way that it was created. We launched the currency because we had these members from all over the world, and we didn't have a way for them to easily exchange value. And the payment systems at that point were kind of difficult. If we were doing a project in Ho Chi Minh City or Beijing or Venice or London, from one week to the next, it was really difficult to have financial capability. And we also wanted to unleash financial capability for the members to be able to trade with each other with a globally relevant currency that in our case, we wanted to link to nature. And so we backed Ven with assets, and some of those assets included nature. So it could become a kind of natural way to support the preservation of nature through, in this case, carbon that was embedded in the currency. So my view is that, if you think of an economy or a civilization as a kind of body, as a joint unit, the means of exchange are kind of like blood, and it's like a circulation system. And so Ven became the circulation system for the community, and it's something that everyone in the community has access to, and it enables them to exchange intentionality as much as value. And that I think is really important. But there are some sort of basic, fundamentals around economics and the way that things work from an economic standpoint that remain very true, regardless of whether you're using, dollars or rand or ven. And those fundamental sort of things, I think, stay very much in place. But for us, a lot of what we were doing was thinking about, we always said that Hub was meant to be a place for conscious transformation, a place where someone could come and find a secure and safe place to be able to transform their own consciousness. And for a long time, that was a very theoretical idea. But in many ways, the actual reality of that transformation began when we introduced a new kind of intentional money into the network. By changing the fundamentals of the money in the community, we were then able to begin to manifest different outcomes for the things that we did. And then, since then, we've grown in a lot of ways, and we've developed a lot of other pillars that are part of this idea of the virtual state. And together, I think they're all kind of rooted in this intentionality that comes from the money that is part of the community. I think it actually plays a really big impact in how societies or communities manifest.
Yeah, absolutely. And Stan, tell me more about the collective consciousness, because obviously that's a key area for me in terms of conscious leadership and conscious cultures and how we go about doing business, conscious business today. And you say that obviously the shift in how you addressed VEN and digital currencies in a digital community shifted the consciousness around that. Tell me a little bit more about how that works.
Well, I think that to some extent, society in and of itself is moving through phases of consciousness. And part of this is driven by technology. So technology is, from a very basic level, changing the brain's ability to function. And so a really basic example of this is just the number of contacts that we have. 200 years ago, an average person maintained maybe 25 to 50 meaningful contacts, because we were mostly agrarian and rural societies, and you just didn't meet that many people. And then, 50 years ago, that number had grown by a quantum leap to, several thousand people who you would have meaningful relationships or connections to in a period of your life. Today, especially for Western technologically connected societies, that number has grown to the tens of thousands. And so we need technology to help us process those relationships and to maintain those relationships. And we actually end up creating new types of relationships that didn't exist before. I mean, you and I are a great example of this. We've known each other for 15 years, but we haven't spoken in several years. And we still kind of follow each other loosely through our social web of connectivity. And this actually changes the brain waves, the frequencies of the brain in terms of how we're using our minds and the neural pathways and the neural connections that are being built and maintained in our brains. So for children today, there seems to be, but according to some studies, more prefrontal cortex activity, because children are processing a lot more information in much shorter bursts of time. But the deep learning neurons that go into the other parts of the brain are being exercised often less, and they're seeing less capability for children to develop the kinds of deep thinking that exists there. So that's a kind of rote example. But when you take social networks and the ability to kind of merge, in our case, physical and virtual capabilities into these spaces, and then you move intentionality into it, you can actually start to, I believe, physically affect the consciousness levels within a group. So one thing that has started happening within the physical locations that we do are very intentional exercises when, say, our teams open a location, or just in the natural course of activities that would happen in a hub. In addition to running an online social network, we operate physical locations that our members are able to gather at and, network or work or have a dinner or a party or an event. But a lot of those things now include meditation or a sound bath or, other things that are designed to help people effectively think about their mental state and actively work to enhance their mental state. Right. And I think that combination is seeing real outcomes. Whether we're doing it at our hub at Burning Man, or it's the hub in Davos, or our innovation campus somewhere in Europe. All of these locations, we're actively working now on like mental health and mental clarity as a component of this overall networking capability.
So interesting that you bring up neuroscience, Stan, because I can remember probably about the time that we met, or perhaps a few years later, listening to Don Tapscott, who was one of our Thinkers 50, I think the year before last now, with his book Blockchain Revolution, which he wrote with his son.
Yeah, it's a very popular book.
Very. And his previous book, I forget the title of, was very much focused on the research that he'd done around young people and how their brains are wired differently and how they process information differently. So I think that, on our day-to-day awareness level, so many more people are much more aware of the effects of today's environments, our worlds of work, our social connections, and how we actually interact with each other than ever before. Saying that, I don't think that our methodologies or our patterns for coping with the stress and added pressures of all of these, being always on to emails and messaging. And
well, that's why I think you see such a movement towards people shutting off, right? Like,
right.
It's becoming in a way more extreme where, we're super on, but then you also see this like massive like growth and wellness and the need for people to try to shut off or to try to connect to nature. I just spent a month in Brazil and several weeks in the Amazon doing exactly that. Frankly, I was working on another project, which I think we'll talk about later, but, several weeks in the Amazon with indigenous tribes, really disconnected in many ways from that, but also working intentionally on studying, indigenous methods for effectively consciousness, and then thinking about how those methods can be brought into the world that we live in. And I think there are a number of people working on these ideas. And certainly as a community, hub culture, I've seen it move so much in terms of the people that work with us and also the people who interact with us being way more focused and interested in that side of things, to the point where it's really becoming ingrained in the business as well. And I've seen massive differences in the level of success that our teams have on projects based on how much attention we're paying to intentionality going into it. Like we always do now, like a meditation going into a project. And we try to set intentionality with the group and to try to harmonize the frequency of the people on our team. And I see time and time again that when that happens, the outcomes for the group are amazing. They work better together, they get along better together. And the people who miss that end up in a weird way, kind of like energetically disconnected from the work that's going on. It's really something it's quite powerful. And even if people are sensitive to that energetic connection or not sensitive to that energetic connection, I think they still benefit from it, whether they feel it themselves or not.
Yeah, I absolutely love this, because instead of us talking about collective consciousness as if it just exists, that intention of creating the collective consciousness to hold that space for that group to serve that purpose does need work. And I think a lot of people are perhaps, we talk a lot about, the 5 people that we spend the most time with and how they really shape our world and our thinking and how we feel about things and how we approach things. The key here, of course, is, as we spend time with those 5 people and we hopefully choose the people we spend time with, so really is that need to choose the environments and the business projects and engagements that we're involved with intentionally to get a better result for the future. Stan, I'm really curious, because one of the things that I am finding in this world of work today is that there seems to be, just as in many other things, geopolitics or anything we can think of right now, there seems to be a massive polarization, perhaps old school, old thinking organizations, teams, cultures, and those organizations that really are shifting rapidly towards an emergent future. How do you see this? I mean, it's wonderful having this. How many people are in hub culture today?
There's around 50,000.
50,000, right? So it's a lovely resource to be able to look at and actually quantify, what's actually going on around that sort of polarization. What is your experience of that?
I mean, I think people are drawn to like-minded people generally. And so you see the ability for technology to provide an audience for almost everyone, depending on what their previous worldview is. And, quite frankly, algorithms are designed to optimize efficiency and productivity, which increasingly route us, especially in the digital world, into kind of funnels, and those funnels themselves tend to be polarizing. And so I think really that the web today and the way that social media works is actually doing a lot to make us feel and think that we're more polarized than we actually are. And that actually sets off a feedback loop that enhances the polarization.
Yeah.
However, I don't think that we're as really polarized as people think. And I think that on, let's just say the conscious side of the coin, people, I think, tend to, get excited about it because they start to see really, manifest changes happening. And there's a kind of dual reality. There's like normal reality, and then there's like kind of conscious reality. Right. And when you dip into conscious reality, especially when you hit a flow state, it's like there are no coincidences. Everything matters. Like it gives you reasons to be very diligent about how you perform or how you act, because you can see results from that. And so that's highly reinforcing, and it pushes people down that path to kind of seek more. But as you go down that path, I think it becomes really easy to kind of discount or, to kind of think that this is the only way. Yeah. And then on the other side, you have people who are either traditionalistic or perhaps what you would call scientific, who would sort of discount it and say like, hey, there's nothing to this. You really just need to pay attention to the math, right? And the facts, and reality is reality. And on that side, oddly enough, both extremely traditional, or what you might think of as religious views, or very scientific views, are not incompatible with like higher levels of consciousness, right? So scientifically working towards essentially a kind of evolutionary state by opening up more neural pathways in the brain is not incompatible with science. It's just that science doesn't really understand a scientific method for doing that. And so we're still kind of fumbling around in the dark about ways to do it. Some people do mushrooms, and that increases neural brain activity by like a factor of 5x. And then they come away with some, insight from that. Other people are doing meditation. Other people are just, being super conscious about how they interact with people, or setting goals for their next week or their next 5 years. Whatever the method is, that people are trying to do to enhance the conscious performing of their mind is, the method that they're doing, but there isn't a scientific method to it. And then on the religious side, you could argue that there are aspects of religiosity that are compatible with this level of mindfulness, but they're just stories that are essentially told in different ways. And again, the religious side isn't really linked to science. So you have this like kind of dichotomy between the science and the traditional sort of spiritualism side. And then you have this kind of conscious like movement, which is a little bit focused on, say, curious exploration, but with some form of experimentation or a scientific method. And I think eventually all three start to converge as you hit higher points of consciousness. But that doesn't mean that other people aren't interested or, valuable in that journey. They're just perhaps going about it in very different ways.
Yeah, and I think today we're seeing a lot of work that's especially around quantum meets spirituality, where the science kind of meets the spiritual side of things.
Yeah,
And
it's all probabilities, right? And fundamentally it's all math. But, quantum says that you have two opposing states that can exist simultaneously, but they don't exist 100% simultaneously. They exist in a probability ratio between each other. So the atom could be here or there, or there. And depending on observance, the likelihood of that atom materializing in the place that you're looking goes up. So we know that observance has a huge impact on materiality. And so that's at the quantum level. And then, you can, I think, kind of scale that all the way up to the kind of mindfulness level, which says where you put your mind, where you, like, who you hang out with, as you said a minute ago, has a huge impact on what actually manifests. And that's still a probabilistic outcome. But to me, that's like completely in line with both spirituality and science. And what a great opportunity to kind of take both of those two things and then start to play with it and experiment with it and to try to actively shape outcomes from it. So, that's what we're doing within Hub. And that's the kind of space that we're creating for our members to be able to do that in real life with us at our venues, or to kind of have tools to enable that kind of work online.
Fantastic. Stan, tell me a little bit more about Davos, because I know that you had a pavilion there recently. Was that very much focused around Greta and climate change? And what was the main thrust there?
Yeah, so we've been in Davos for the last 14 years. We've had a hub there, and what started as a very small room grew into a building, and then we built another building on top of it called the Ice House, which means innovation for the circular economy, and is focused on sustainable solutions for the planet. And then this year we built the Tech Lodge, which is a new building focused on essentially the existential risk of technology related to like the human species. And then we have a couple other little projects there. And so it's now the campus at Davos. And the focus is entirely on building relationships with CEOs and other business leaders and enabling them to build relationships with each other. We did host Greta this year again. We also hosted her last year, and we're able to give her a platform for being able to talk to the press about the work that she's doing and, quite frankly, her concerns about climate and the environment. But there are thousands of people who pass through the hub, during Davos, and everybody has their own unique and often incredible story. For us, this year was really focused on technology. We did a series of audio discussions called The Chronicles, looking at existential tech, which I think, along with climate, is a huge area that we need to be focused on in terms of making sure that we get tech right with its relationship to the evolution of the human species. Like, there are several very real scenarios in which we don't come out looking very good in terms of the relationship to the evolution of technology, especially as we approach singularity, which we may or may not reach anytime soon. But it's really the period after connected tech and before singularity that's the most dangerous for us. And so really being conscious about thinking how we're building technology and how it impacts humans is something that I've become very focused on over the last year or two.
Yeah, and that's clanging so many loud bells for me. I'm working in New York with a Genome Advisory, and which is really all about ethics. It's all about the space. We know that science and technology either can or will be able to do pretty much anything.
Well, have you ever heard of Lucan sapien?
Yes.
So it means last universal common ancestor. So, the idea that we're less than a generation away from being able to augment our own DNA with the DNA from other species, or just to kind of augment together with machines. My neural laces are less than 10 years away, where we'll be able to plug our thoughts directly into the internet. But that also means the internet will be reading our thoughts, aggregating those thoughts across large groups of individuals, and then coming out with conclusions from that. I mean, it's really very interesting.
and deeply concerning. I think I was at a Singularity event, funnily enough, the other night, and what concerns me a lot, I work a lot also with futures and future models and helping people to actually think in multiple futures. And one of the things that I'm finding time and time again is that there's a great celebration around what technology and science can do. Produce perhaps twins in a petri dish in China, and science goes, wow, that's amazing. And yes, I guess, for science and technology, it is amazing. But what about the human race? And I think that...
there's two sides, right? We need it. I mean,
yes.
Not to bring it back to coronavirus, but, the reality is that the ability for us to sequence the genome and be working actively on about 20 vaccines already within a period of 3 months is amazing. We need science to be able to save us from ourselves. But let's be honest, the virus is a result of really bad treatment of animals over long periods of time.
Yeah.
So,
brings it back to reality, right? Stan, tell me more about the Amazon.
Well, so that was great. So I just spent several weeks with the Ashaninka tribe in the Amazon. They are an incredible tribe. There are many tribes in the Amazon who have very long cultural histories, but the Ashaninka in particular are older than the Inca. Their tradition is unbroken and goes back over 1,000 years. They're one of the only tribes not to be decimated by the Portuguese or the Spanish during colonial times, because they were so deep in the Amazon, and they have incredible indigenous knowledge, like many tribes. I mean, there are many tribes in the Amazon, and quite frankly, around the world, who have incredible knowledge. And for me, coming out of this experience, I was really, to be honest, I was very shocked by the amount of disregard that we have paid towards Indigenous communities and the lack of respect that we have for Indigenous communities, because they are incredibly knowledgeable about things, especially related to consciousness, that we totally undervalue. So being able to learn, I was there to learn about governance and, how do you effectively govern a society, however small. The Ashaninka, they have less members than Hub does, but they've managed to successfully govern that community for over 1,000 years. So I was really there to look at how do you create long-term intergenerational governance that can really last. And the way that they do things, it's very interesting. They have only really oral histories. But what's amazing is that they're also extremely connected to nature. And the idea of being connected to nature in the way that they are, and then applying it towards the technologies that we have today is what I'm most interested in. And so I'm, really happy about the outcomes from that. Because of the work that we're doing with them, we're essentially partnering with the Ashaninka and an institute called Urenki Tassarensi, which is an institute that the Ashaninka have created to move some of their knowledge out into the world. And we're partnering with them, and the plan is to work on Amazonian reforestation. So the tribe has actively replanted over 2 million trees on hundreds and hundreds of hectares of land that were decimated by cattle ranching. So, as we all know, Amazonian deforestation is a very big problem. And the reason is often because of cattle ranching. And the ranches are used for a few years, and then the soil gets decimated because of burning. They don't use regenerative agriculture, and then they have to cut down more. So the tribes have been buying the decimated cattle ranching and then replanting the forest. And they showed us we were staying in areas of forests that have been rehabilitated over the last 20 years. So off of the back of that, we are combining some of our technology with this idea of Amazon reforestation, and we've launched hubculture.city, which is a new virtual reality city that we're building that will be available for, so to speak, our citizens. And then tied to that are efforts around reforestation and buying land and reforesting the forest. And what's cool about it is that not only are we looking to reforest the actual land that, to kind of rehabilitate these small parts of the Amazon, but also then to embed technology to create a kind of futuristic city. So we call it Hub Culture Emerald City. And the idea is that you have a virtual city on one side, and then eventually in 4 phases, a real city will emerge in the Amazon that's fully in harmony with nature. So circular economy, renewable energy, 100% like recycling of waste, and looking at new advanced technologies that can change the way that people live in nature. So, it's a long project for us, and we'll see how far we get, but I think that it's one of our next horizons for the community.
Wow, Stan, gosh. I always need to take a deep breath with that. When are you looking at? That's absolutely awesome. I'm really intrigued and curious to learn more.
Yeah,
I beg your pardon?
At hubculture.city.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. What I'll do is post all relevant links and what have you in the show notes so that people can dip in and have a look and see what you're up to. Yeah. Stan, in terms of the actual physical city, what is your timeline around that?
Well, it's really a 3 to 5 year project. The first step right now is we're building hubculture.city, which is a virtual city. And it's particularly relevant given the fact that travel and, quite frankly, our physical pavilions are all threatened for 2020 because of the limitations around travel and events, and that's a big part of what we do. So we're building a virtual environment to be able to host people in new ways related to some of these moments and these events. And then with that project, we're looking to essentially be investing in these things. So, it's a 4-phase project, and phase 1 for 2020 is building as much as we can of the virtual city. Right. The first neighborhood in Emerald City will open in April, so not very far away. And then, quite frankly, we'll be putting funds immediately towards the restoration side of the reforestation. And then, we'll see how it goes. I think the first thing that we want to do physically on the ground is a kind of wellness facility, especially around mental health, because there's a lot of evidence that certain plant medicines and other techniques from the deep Amazon that the tribes have could be helpful to people with mental health or depression or other issues. And so I'd love us to see a kind of space emerge with the tribe that is focused on providing, some scope of mental wellness for people who want to visit that. And then we'll see what else emerges out of it. But certainly the use of advanced technology is a core part of what we're going to be doing.
So interesting, Stan. I know that the World Health Organization finally recognized burnout as a thing last year officially. And I'd say that during the course of the last 6 months, 6 to 12 months, I've been approached by and have been chatting to a bunch of people who are looking at putting together centers for the rehabilitation of people who have been through burnout, which is quite a thing. And, we're either looking at ways of preventing burnout, but of course, once we cross a line and we actually land up in that sort of state, it's a tricky journey to come back from. And I've worked with, you probably know, but I used to work in executive search globally, and have seen thousands of people over the years, both under Mowbray by Design's umbrella, but also in executive search, who've actually crossed that line into a clinical burnout. And it takes a long time to recover. And if there are better ways of approaching this, perhaps rather than the traditional prescribed route, then we should be embracing that.
Well, I think nature is really important for addressing burnout. Like, we're not connected to nature, especially in urban environments. Yeah. And just getting connected to nature, I think, does a huge amount for like energetic restoration. Being in the jungle for those weeks, and it was the most restorative thing I've done in years. And I do think that nature has a really important, we are part of nature, but we tend to ignore that. And our inability to connect with nature, I think, is really symptomatic of a lot of the sickness in the world today. So nature has to be preserved.
Absolutely. And Stan, last but not least, you just launched a fund.
We did. In March, we launched a digital asset fund, which is connected to VAN, our digital currency. So it's essentially a hedge fund that's investing into, it actually has a very unique investment thesis. So it's investing into digital assets, which you would think of as, the many types of new emerging technologies that are coming to fore, but it has a very unique filter. It has an SDG, ESG filter. So anything that we invest in with the fund has to be done with an SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, or ESG, environmental and social governance lens. And that actually reduces the number of things that we can invest in with the fund, but it also provides a very unique metric by which we measure success. Obviously, you want to measure financial return and the performance of the fund from an economic standpoint, but it goes further. We also have to measure the success of the fund on its commitment to these initiatives. So what we're looking for are initiatives that fit the goals of the Sustainable Development Goals, which there are 17, and are connected to environmental and social governance. So it's not just a traditional finance fund. So for instance, we wouldn't be able to invest in carbon polluting technologies like oil and gas. We'd instead be looking at perhaps, things like solar. So, there are a lot of metrics and variables to how we look at things with the fund, but we're actively looking to have, extremely good performance, hopefully, with this kind of social purpose as well.
Fantastic. Stan, thank you so much for your time. I've got 1,000 other questions, but perhaps we'll pick up in episode 2 another time.
Well, maybe we should have you onto one of our chronicles soon.
Absolutely. That would be amazing. I'd absolutely love that. And I'm going to keep a keen eye on Emerald City. I think it's something that personally it appeals hugely. And I will, as I mentioned before, post all relevant links and make sure that people have a way of getting hold of you. Across the different platforms. Stan, lovely to connect with you again. And we'll be in touch.
Okay, we'll see you at a hub soon.
Thank you for joining me on this episode of Lift. I'm delighted you're here. If you'd like to connect with Stan, head over to my website, mowbraybydesign.com, where you'll find the show notes and relevant links. Whilst you're there, don't forget to subscribe to the show in iTunes or any of your favorite platforms to never miss an episode. And if you're loving Lift, I'd really appreciate a rating in iTunes or simply share with a friend who needs a lift. You can get in touch with me for coaching or speaking engagements by sending an email to Louise at mowbraybydesign.com or click on the contact button on my site. Until next time, lift yourself, lift another.